Okay, sounds good. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome. Hello, and welcome to Central Society of MIT's first Out and Out event. This event was labeled Out and Out because, like, you're out of religion and you're also out about it, and we want to encourage our friends who have, basically crossed over to the other side. We're a group of secular students at MIT. We are the community for non-religious people, ex-believers, people who have never believed, people who support secularism generally, and we offer support and community like this one. And we also have events to share knowledge and experiences with one another. This event is specifically born of this notion, like, if we have the experiences of a person coming out of Christianity, out of Hinduism, out of Islam, out of whatever religion, are all different. So this is more about, like, getting people from specific religious communities to share their experiences with one another, having come out of disbelief, having come out of belief and into disbelief and after. So among those who have made the jump, we have some great guests today. We have Faisal, we have Karim and Muna, and these are well-known names. Like Faisal is pretty well-known for the GSHM, Karim and Muna from Ex-Muslims of North America, the preeminent organization for ex-Muslims in North America. And what we would like to do is look at, like, the experiences of ex-Muslims. It's very hard, like, even globally, especially globally, there are many countries where apostasy is illegal, and virtually all of those are Islamic countries, and we have many friends over there who cannot come out openly about their lack of belief, cannot discuss it openly. They have to have all these underground meetings and such. Even if it's not the death penalty, it's something pretty severe, like civil penalties and so on. There have been various attempts at activism. One of the most famous ones is Ex-Muslim Because. I'll be playing some of those at the end. But yeah, that activism kind of also meant some resistance, and generally being an ex-Muslim means some kind of resistance. It's like, you have the bigots on one side who, like, always distrust you because you used to be a Muslim, or they feel you are not un-Muslim enough. And then there's the Muslims who have, well, many communities of Muslims see apostasy as a capital offense. Not all, but many do. One of the recent martyrs was Nahad, who was recently shot, actually. I mean, he was not an ex-Muslim, but basically this is like the situation for people who blaspheme in any way. This cartoon was actually made against ISIS. It was actually meant to be poking fun at ISIS, but just because it represented some kind of deity, he was arrested by the Jordanian government and then shot outside the courtroom. So, by the way, incidentally, a couple of days ago was International Blasphemy Day, so we remember him and other martyrs at this time. So we want to basically create this event as a sort of getting together for ex-Muslims, and actually Muslims who are interested in the ex-Muslim experience, and never been Muslims who are interested in the ex-Muslim experience, to just talk and see each other's perspectives and so on. And to start off with, we have a keynote by Faisal, Saeed and Mutar. He is born by the rivers of Babylon and raised in the erstwhile... Yeah, look at the song reference. No, he really was born by the rivers of Babylon. And he was raised in the erstwhile caliphate capital, the great round city of Baghdad. He grew up in a religiously moderate Muslim family in Iraq and reverted to atheism at an early age. His writings and promotion of secularism have made him an Al-Qaeda target. ISIS target yet?
Huh?
ISIS target yet?
No, that was
just Al-Qaeda. You're starting small.
Yeah, that was the moderates.
He survived 3 attempted kidnappings, but lost a brother and a cousin to sectarian violence in Iraq. He visited Lebanon and then Malaysia, where he founded the global secular humanist movement in September 2010 with the mission of addressing the absence of recognition and legal protection for secular humanists, especially in the Middle East. As a result of his activism, he received death threats from religious militias such as the Mahdi Army and elements tied to Al-Qaeda. Due to his conflicts with Islamists over his secular humanist identity and the deaths of family members and sectarian violence, Faisal fled Iraq and received asylum in the US in 2013. After living in Houston, then he moved to DC, where he lives and continues to operate GSHM with the broader aim of using reason, evidence, and scientific methods of inquiry. He also serves as a community manager for movements.org, a platform which allows activists from closed societies to connect directly with people from around the world with skills to help them, including ex-Muslims. Ladies and gentlemen, Faisal, Saeed, and Mutar.
By the way, that was just straight out of my Wikipedia page, which I check a lot frequently.
Slightly modified.
Well, this is the right place to sit, right? Or stand? Okay, cool. Hello, everyone. It's good to be back. Thank you, Sohan, for inviting me again. I'm mostly here for emotional support, but I just thought of giving a speech while I'm here already. So I'm just going to give a small background that is probably not mentioned in my Wikipedia, which has been taken from some articles. I was born in Iraq right after the first Gulf War. I was born in the middle of Saddam Hussein regime, which was after the first Gulf War where the sanctions happened. And then the US invasion or liberation, depending on how you define it, depends on which Wikipedia page you follow, is when Saddam was taken over and the vacuum was eventually created, and Iraq was divided to mostly militias and civil war between Sunnis and Shias, in which I was living in the middle of in West Baghdad, where I mostly grew up. So I was born between the rivers of Babylon, as he mentioned, but I was born in Babylon, which is the province south of Baghdad, and my parents moved to Baghdad when I was 8 or 9 years old. But my upbringing, which he also mentioned, I mean, I consider myself to some extent privileged, for the lack of a better word, is that my parents are very liberal. So my dad told me, you read books, you make up your mind. If you want to be a Muslim, that's fine. If you don't want to be a Muslim, that's fine. And that's the way I grew up inside the house, the small house that I used to live in. But the moment that I get out of the house is when the clash of civilizations happen, in which the majority of people tend to be raised in more dogmatic households and more religious families. And I was mostly the black sheep in the society, but I also found my own cults within the school that I grew up to. And I found some people who also kind of grew up the same way or became skeptical during teenage years and so on. So I was pretty vocal, at least within my own district and within my own circles, which eventually led some people who, when the rise of Al-Qaeda happened, to report to Al-Qaeda that I was the devil that I am. And they started targeting me individually. I had to move schools, and the guy actually knows that I moved to other districts. I used to go to the Mutar, which was the school I went to. I used to go to the one in Khadra, which is the area that eventually got dominated by Al-Qaeda, and I moved to the Harthia, which are a much safer zone that's closer to the green zone. And by the time I lost my brother and my cousin to sectarian violence, Al-Qaeda targeted them. And so I had to leave Iraq eventually in 2009. Left Iraq, went to Lebanon. I was supposed to go to the UK. I was rejected from the UK because they requested £60,000 in my savings account or whatever, which is impossible. I live in New York now and I don't have £60,000 in my savings account. And so it's actually kind of like a block that they don't want more Iraqis or more Malaysians to go there. And so I moved to Malaysia for studies, and at the same time I applied for the UNHCR, the United Commission for Refugees, and I eventually made it to America in 2013 as a refugee in March. So that's kind of my my background. So so within this kind of a hell of a journey that I lost many friends who were active in the secular movement all over the Middle East, and the guy that Sohan mentioned is a guy that I'm also very familiar with. I didn't know him personally, but it's a small circle, it's a small town. Everybody knows everybody. He was a friend of a friend. And so I came here to the United States, and one of my missions is to help the people who are secularist and advance human rights in the societies that I grew up in and so on. So I worked in a project, which I became the project manager of, called movements.org, in which we try to help create a counter-narrative to extremism, and in that regard, it's Islamic extremism in the Middle East and Southeast Asia by helping them. Because the issue, I mean, I mentioned, I think, in my previous speech here in MIT, I said that it's easier to start a terrorist group in the Middle East than to start a secular one. And that's a pure logistical thing, because if, let's say, you're in Iraq and you say you're a Sunni and you start a Sunni militia, you'll get funding from Qatar, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, whatever, you name it. And if you start a Shia militia, you'll get money from Iran in that regard and some Hezbollah people in the south of Lebanon. So the Sunni militias have the funding and the Shia militias have the funding, while the secular folks, the secular people, have literally nobody there to help them. So, and unfortunately, it's not actually unfortunately, it's fortunate and unfortunate at the same time, seculars not necessarily resort to violence to achieve their means, while the militias, like the Sunni and the Shia militias, they don't mind using violence to achieve what they want to achieve. So for me, I mean, I see it more of an ideological warfare. I don't think that the battle with extremism is not necessarily just a physical one, but I think that there is an ideological inspired terrorism that is happening around the Middle East and around the world in that regard that needs to be fought ideologically. So in that case, I'm trying to help what I refer to as the third party, the people who are neither Sunni militias or Shia militias, but people who, as I used to believe in, that the people who believe in secular values that kind of bring the Sunnis and Shias and the Yazidis and the atheists and the Christians and so on, and their secular system in which all of them can live equally. Because as we have witnessed in Iraq, and the same case right now with Syria and Yemen and all across, is that the moment that there is one sectarian group rules over the country, they eventually lead to other groups being discriminated against. So then there's going to be a balance, there's going to be a difference of balance of power. As you have witnessed in Iraq, it used to be Saddam who was Sunni and have Sunni allies, and now Shias and which have Iranian allies. That balance of power eventually creates more hatred and creates more division and creates more wars. So the only way, in my opinion, is to have a secular regime. And same can be said about case in Syria and case in Lebanon and case in Yemen and so on. And we have seen a successful secular regime which eventually came after the Arab Spring, which I hope it will succeed, which is the example of Tunisia, in which people democratically were able to vote for a secular regime, even though not necessarily stable at the moment. It may fall, but I inshallah, right, that is going to be, it's going to be successful. When it comes to, I mean, how many of you come from a background that is not Islamic? Interesting, cool. So, as Sohan, the picture that he showed about apostasy laws, I mean, there are 11 countries in the world that, as far as I know, the article in Reuters, if I remember correctly, that execute people for being apostates. And all of them are Muslim-dominated countries. And the only difference, I think, was in the execution of gays, is that Uganda, I think Uganda or some country in Africa, is the addition to these 11 countries, which is a Christian-dominated country. So when it comes to discrimination against atheists and discrimination against LGBT, it's mostly the same countries, except that when it comes to LGBT, you can add Russia, Christian Orthodox Church, and the African Church. So the experience within, I mean, obviously there is no the experience of the people who leave Islam, but there is kind of a common theme, I would say, that exists mostly in the people who come from the countries that Sohan showed in the photo, is in which if you decide one day that you're going to leave Islam and you're going to make it public, obviously you can hide it, you can fake it until you make it, right? You can hide it until that you leave the country. And that's one of the cases that I've worked on within Bangladesh and stuff, and people who decided that they want to become atheists. And then I told them, like, don't say it until you get a way out. But if you're going to make it public in which your family get to know about you, or the government in that regard, because it's government sanctioned, then you're going to face a problem. So it's not going to be only a family problem, in which the cases, for example, in Christian fundamentalism, in which in America, for example, if you escape the family, the police is not going to come and kill you for being an atheist. So it's the government that is a problem. Also, in countries such as the one that I grew up in Iraq, in which the government hardly existed, like God, you know. So there is hardly any government. So generally, the militias are the ones who take care of the situation of their own hands, and that's what actually happened to me. I wasn't threatened by the Iraqi government or the Iraqi police or stuff. It was just a bunch of bastards, for the lack of a better word. It was just a bunch of bastards who now hold guns and now part of militias like Mahdi Army and Al-Qaeda and so on. And they are the ones who take the things to their own hands. So that's the countries like Iraq and Syria and Lebanon, in which now things are very more uncontrollable. And the same goes for Pakistan and countries which is controlled by the Taliban. So I think that the ex-Muslim experience generally, as like, thanks Sohan for kind of bring that subject to this university, is that it is kind of very different than all the other experiences. I mean, the fact that you may get killed for leaving the faith by your family, in some cases, obviously I'm not going to generalize on all cases, because some people like me, which we were lucky, which I said to my parents, I'm an atheist, and my dad said, oh, let's go have a coffee. Like, they didn't have a problem. But in general, I would say, and considering how many cases that I've been working on, in which I get emails of people who are telling me that my father is going to kill me if I just tell that I just have doubts about God. And this is not just, I mean, there is this kind of mantra in the media in which the discussion about what is extreme and what is moderate. And so whenever I generally talk about the subject, especially right now with the subject of ISIS and so on, they will say, well, this is an extreme fringe minority. Well, that's true. ISIS is an extreme fringe minority. But the belief when it comes to killing apostates or killing people who leave the faith within the Muslim world, within the 1.5 billion that they're mostly referenced in the media, this number is not just a fringe minority. So, I mean, it really depends what you define as a fringe minority as well. Is that if you look at 1.5 billion Muslims, and if you look at the pure research that's being done on how many people believe that apostates should be killed, and you see countries like Egypt, in which like it's more than 70% of the people, and you see countries like Jordan, in which it's also more than 70%, and go all across. So if you only, just like for the sake of, I'm being so conservative here by saying it's only 50% of Muslims from the 1.5 billion, that's 750 million people. This is not a minority. So that belief that apostates and the people who should leave the religion should be killed is not a fringe minority. And 750 million is more than a fringe minority. And so what that means is that makes Islamic religion, how much time do I have? Okay. That makes the Muslim world, in that case, with the 1.5 billion, much more different than the Christian, and in that case, when it comes to numbers, the Hindu world, in which the number of people who believe that atheists should be executed is much more than just ISIS or just Al-Qaeda or just the militias that we are talking about. It's actually a belief that is much more widespread within the Muslim communities. And even if it's, so as I said, obviously when I said like it's only 750 million, which is a huge number, there's 750 million that do not, and that's kind of a good news. But that doesn't mean that at this moment, in the 21st century, we have a very big, a huge problem of extremism that exists within the Muslim world. And I think that the biggest victims of it in that regard are the Muslims who are not defined as Muslims enough, and the minorities within the minorities, the Shias within the Sunni-dominated countries, and the Sunnis within the Shia-dominated countries, and the Ahmadis within Pakistan. And they are the most people who get affected, because when the moment you're going to create a loophole in which apostates need to be killed, eventually it's going to become, who is the apostate? Are the Shias are the apostates? Are the Ahmadis who are the apostates? Are the people who don't pray 5 times a day are the apostates? So eventually that loophole that is already created in the Muslim world of the belief of killing apostates is really widespread. And I think that it needs to be defeated. And I think that hopefully, if we're going to start a conversation about it, and we start challenging the bad ideas that exist within the Muslim community, I think we can get shit done. Thank you so much.
Faisal. That is a very, very, very relevant and very, very enlightening speech.
How I do when I improvise? Oh my God.
Yeah, that is, and improvised as well. Okay, and actually, now that you mention it, I was reminded of a recent case in August. No?
Oh, no,
Please have a seat. So I was actually reminded of a recent case in August. Zachary Boss, who's like involved in secularism and runs like the atheists of Boston Atheists and is the Massachusetts director of the local secular community. It came to his attention that an atheist, someone who recently apostatized in a Middle Eastern country which he did not name, had to get out of the country quickly, had been offered a scholarship, but had to basically leave the country and take a scholarship and escape his family, who would probably turn him in at some point, very, very shortly. So Zachary raised over $3,500 using crowdfunding, and we were able to...
GoFundMe.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So crowdfunding, the Atheist College Fund, with the money raised, we were able to safely extract him from his country, get him over here to a college in New England, actually. So I don't know if he could be in this room, I have no idea. I hope he is. But even otherwise, it's nice to know that one of us managed to escape. So anyway, on that positive note, let's look at some of our friends who could not be here, but left us messages. One is Yasmin. She's pretty well known nowadays in the ex-Muslim circuit. She tweets at ConfessionXMu, and she is of Arab origin and an ex-Muslim atheist Canadian. And she writes about her experience growing out of Islam at confessionsofanexmuslim.tumblr.com. From there, she's working on her memoir, Some of My Best Friends Are Jewish, and Other Confessions of an Ex-Muslim, recounting in vivid and lucid detail her upbringing in a conservative, actually, if you listen to some of her podcasts, it was extremely conservative, Muslim household, and her gradual journey towards open atheism and ex-Muslim atheist activism. So I have a message from her.
Hello, my fellow godless heathens. I am really honored that Sohan asked me to record a welcome message for this event today. I wish I could have been there myself, of course, but alas, I could not be. But I know you're all going to have an exhilarating and enlightening day where you're going to get to hang out with amazing people and be really inspired by each other. I think that it's really important to have these very essential conversations. I've been an atheist for about 15 years now, but it's only in the past few years where I could openly admit that without fear that people would think I was a Satan worshiper or that I ate babies. So I think that our demographic is growing. We're able to speak more freely now without fear of being judged. I think that, in fact, we're the hope for the future. Religious people have made a mess of things, and it's time to steer steer humanity in a direction that's more based on reason and science and evidence, as opposed to fairy tales and whatnot. I think that especially for the ex-Muslims there today, there's an extra privilege. We feel extra special, like extra happy that we're able to speak out because we were aware of all of our like-minded peers across the planet who have to stay silent for fear of their lives. So we feel like it's our responsibility to speak out on their behalf. As ex-Muslims, we exist in this weird little world in between the right and left where we're actually attacked from both sides. We see the clear dangers of Islam. We know that these Islamic theocracies oppress their citizens. We know how Sharia law is inhumane, but we also love our Muslim family and friends, and we don't want them to suffer from anti-Muslim bigotry. It's great that events like this can highlight this unique ex-Muslim perspective, and I'm really excited about that. I might be biased, but I think that ex-Muslims are some of the bravest people out there, and they need our support. We should all support each other. And thank you all for taking the time to listen and to care about our struggle and to hopefully help us to make the world a better place.
So I'll probably publish this audio. So big hand for Yasmin, please. Thank you. So we have another message, actually, this one from a blogger and podcaster. This is Aina, tweets at Nice Mangoes. Yeah, no E in mangoes. That's something to remember. So Aina is an Islam-critical, anti-bigotry, apostate activist of Pakistani background and also Canadian nationality, who has been involved in the ex-Muslim community for years. She wields rhetorical bluntness devastatingly and has been the target of so much Islamist and apologist ire that she has been mob banned in the past from both YouTube and Facebook. Simultaneously, she has been an uncompromising voice against anti-Muslim bigotry being stirred up by rightists. She blogs at Nice Mangoes on blogspot.com, and is the author of a sex-positive gay acceptance book for people of Muslim background, My Chacha is Gay. Recently, she has become infamous as the host of the groundbreaking Polite Conversations podcast, where she discusses religion, atheism, and other current issues with guests coming from a variety of positions. I strongly suggest you subscribe to this podcast. It's at soundcloud.com/politeconversations. And check out the book as well, and definitely check out her blog and her Twitter account. It's very dramatic. So I'll play her message.
Hello, heathens, apostates, skeptics, and supporters. I'm glad you all made it to the first out-and-out event by the Secular Society of MIT. I'm sure you'll come across many tales of disbelief and doubt tonight, some inspirational, some downright frightening. We've all walked different paths, had different journeys, that on this day have led us to this secular event. My journey brought me from Saudi Arabia to Canada, from being a sort of practicing Muslim that was raised in a very liberal Muslim family, to being an ex-Muslim, which puts me in a pretty interesting position in today's political climate. For Muslim bigots, I was never Muslim enough. For anti-Muslim bigots, I'm still too Muslim. It's what I like to call the ex-Muslim hate sandwich. It's not easy leaving behind the faith you grew up in. I'm very fortunate that I have a supportive family, but many live in fear of being outed as disbelievers because they do not have a support network. Those are the people that inspire me to be a vocal critic of religion, a vocal critic of Islam, because it is for them that we need to normalize apostasy, so they too can speak freely and be themselves, so they can know they are not alone. For those reasons and many more, it is important that we attend events like this, that we make sure our stories are heard. And don't for a second think that one has to choose between standing up for minority rights and criticizing a minority religion. These things are not mutually exclusive. We can stand up for the rights of Muslims, which is becoming increasingly important with Donald Trump on the scene, and we can simultaneously criticize archaic ideas within Islam. It's so important to do so, to nudge our own communities forward. I look forward to a day where being an ex-Muslim isn't controversial. But till then, keep speaking out. Enjoy the rest of the event, everybody.
Again, strongly suggested. Check out the podcast. It's very pretty balanced actually, and she's fighting against both bigotry and Islamism. So next up, we have two representatives from the Ex-Muslims of North America. The Ex-Muslims of North America is an organization dedicated to supporting ex-Muslims in the continent in promoting religious dissent and criticism, and fighting discrimination and ostracism against those who leave the faith. It reaches hundreds of ex-Muslims locally through over 18 chapters across the US and Canada. The website is xmna.org. We have two representatives, Muna and Karim. Muna was born and raised in Tunisia to a Palestinian father and a Syrian mother. After the Oslo Accord, she moved with the family to Ramallah in the West Bank. Their religiosity and national narrative were the most inescapable elements of everyday life and slowly overtook almost all personal space. After graduating from Birzeit University, Muna worked across the West Bank with the dance and folklore focused NGO that worked with teachers in rural and remote areas to create a safe space for children during the Second Intifada. In 2002, Muna moved to the US to pursue graduate degrees in economics and applied research methods, and chose a career in public opinion research that took her to war zones. There she used her research to give women, widows, disenfranchised minorities, and those without voice an opportunity to tell their personal stories. This included spending more than 5 years working in Iraq, Afghanistan, Jordan, Lebanon, and Turkey, and interviewing tens of thousands of people from these countries. She is currently taking a break from working in conflict zones, has recently returned from Iraq, and is still involved with this work part-time. She's using the private sector platform of medical research to improve on humanizing clinical trials. Karim. Karim was born in USA to a Lebanese father and Berber Moroccan mother. Growing up, he spent summers abroad visiting family in either Beirut, Lebanon, or Rabat, Morocco. Dealing with racism in childhood forced him to develop both deep curiosity and commitment to Islam. He regularly went to weekend summer Islamic school where he had the privilege to learn from some very knowledgeable teachers. Eventually, the accumulation of theological knowledge made contradictions very apparent, and he left Islam in his early 20s. Post-apostasy, Karim has been working with ex-Muslims of North America to help foster communities of atheists, agnostics, and deists who have left Islam. Through this organization, Karim hopes to help normalize religious dissent within Muslim-majority communities and promote critical and fair discussion of Islam in broader American discourse. Ladies and gentlemen, Karim and Muna.
Allahu Akbar.
Good one.
So, we're finally here. Right, so I want to first, do you have anything else to add to your introduction, by the way? Do you want to say anything to add to your introduction? Okay.
Yeah, I'm fine.
All right, you thought that was good? Okay.
Yeah, very good.
So first I want to talk about this idea of criticism of Islam and criticism of Muslims. Often it seems that a lot of people can't get the difference, or in the public sphere it seems like conflated. What are your opinions on this?
Yeah, I think when discussing Islam and discussing Muslims, often people think Muslims kind of algorithmically follow Islam. Mm-hmm. And, if you talk to a guy growing up in sort of a rural part of the United States, I was asked a lot of questions of, will you kill me if I say the Quran is false? Does your dad beat your mother? Pretty egregious things that weren't true. Which, yes, within theology, Islam kind of legitimizes domestic abuse through verse 434. Insulting Islam, blaspheming, or being an apostate can lead to death. But not every Muslim necessarily follows these ideas or commits to them. So I think largely what the issue becomes is that instead of discussing what people believe and what people do, we start discussing what Islam is, which is something not even theologians agree on. Mm-hmm. And it causes a conflict or dissonance in general discourse.
I think the hardest issue for me is balancing the family, which has a lot of trouble that their only daughter is a kafira, versus balancing, exactly as we've just heard, the rhetoric from living in the U.S., where you're constantly, you represent the Middle East, and you represent Muslims, and you represent Palestinians. And so I must be Hamas in disguise, of course. So that's very difficult because, just like Karim mentioned, in the Middle East, any conversation you have, even about like just basic question of why would we even do this, like from day to day. For instance, my mom, who wears a hijab, starting to wear these like bizarre, small, tiny sleeve things to cover her wrist because the wrist is extremely sexy, and we have to save the world from the wrist. And if you ask her, like, knowing that I no longer believe and I no longer subscribe to the religious belief, like, if I ask her, I'm like, Mom, why are you doing? Why are you wearing this? She automatically attacks, and she's like, why are you asking me? Why don't you ask the nuns? And I'm like, dude, we're in your bedroom. I'm helping you get ready. Why do I have to ask nuns? So there's constant attack, and there's constantly not seeing, even asking about simple daily logic or simple things that will make people's life easy. But it always comes as a huge, like, a propaganda against Muslims and a propaganda against their religions. And here in the U.S., I just simply try to avoid. I work in a company, I work in the private sector, so I, on my day-to-day, try to avoid these kind of conversations because it's just, it makes your life easy. But you still have to face the bizarrest things.
Yeah. I mean, actually, all three of us would probably get, like, pulled up in an airport for looking Muslim. I've actually been mistaken as Egyptian, as Syrian, as Emirati. I mean,
I was on the no-fly
and
list for a while.
I'm Pakistani several times, and
Yeah.
whatever nationality. So, yeah, it's like it kind of seems counterintuitive that we are like agents of Zionism or something like that. Or
Yeah, you deal with it from both sides, and the hate sandwich metaphor is a good one. That from the right, you're kind of characterized. People have already decided what you are, and you come from a Muslim background, and you support X, Y, and Z that people think Muslims believe.
And you have Muslim family members who are still Muslim.
Who are still Muslim, who still, kind of suffer from these attacks. Like, I know growing up, one time my mom was driving me to school, and someone looked in the rearview mirror, saw my mother with a hijab, stopped the car, walked up to her and told her to go back to her country. We're driving on the road out of nowhere. But at the same time, when I went to university and I talked about the issues women go through in the Muslim community, I'm called a bigot. I'm called a race traitor, a house Muslim. And it's these two extremes that we kind of have to exist between. Because, reality's in the middle. And I don't know, it's difficult to sort of play the balancing act of, not perpetuating bigotry, but at the same time pointing out the issues that are really hurting people within the Muslim community and those who leave.
Yeah, it seems like the best way to, a lot of people, when you talk about, like, Islam is not a race, they talk about, Islam has become racialized. Yeah. But don't you think the best way to de-racialize Islam is for lack of a better word, brown people to kind of, like, have diversity of opinions, to, like, not worry about being considered a traitor, not, to actually, like, speak out and have diversity of opinions, right?
I think that one of the biggest issues also within the Muslim community itself is how racist it is with each other, right? Like, so I went to college. My undergraduate was in Ramallah. So 90% Muslims, no diversity of opinion, no diversity of religion other than a very small Christian minority. And then you come to the U.S., and this is the first time for me as somebody who grew up in a Muslim community. I was introduced to Muslims who are not Arabs, who are not Middle Easterners, who are not Palestinian, and the racism within that group of what really makes a good Muslim. So, like, a lot of non-Arabs think that Arabs are making Islam look bad. And Arabs think that everybody who doesn't speak Arabic and their first language is not Arabic is not really Muslim because they can't comfortably read the Quran and so there's a lot of problems there. So like, first of all, we need to get over the fact that you need to even define what a Muslim is, or how a Muslim needs to look like, or what makes a good Muslim and what doesn't make a good Muslim, and just kind of relax about that, which goes back to the idea of like the takfiri ideology, where everybody's saying to everybody, in the Middle East at least, in Palestine big time, that everybody is an infidel who's not from that specific group.
And an example of racism within the Muslim community is I grew up in a pretty racially diverse mosque, thankfully. And a lot of the black Muslims, you know, when interacting with the Arab Muslims, there's a lot of tension. So the sheikh we had, he graduated from Al-Azhar. He's a pretty well-learned scholar. And a black Muslim approached him and called him akhi, brother, in Arabic. And, you know, the imam reacted in Arabic to my father. Why would he call me brother? He's not even Arab. And it's kind of absurd, the racism. It's hard to point like what the point of it is. It's just these strange divisions that pop up within the community, especially someone who's an outsider to growing up as in the U.S. You know, I was kind of an outsider to American culture, but also an outsider to Arab culture as well, or the culture of my family. I'm trying to understand these racial dynamics. It seems kind of superficial.
Now, your story actually kind of parallels many of the stories I've heard of, you know, Christians, including like Matt Dillante, for example. He was studying to be he was a Christian pastor, like a fundamentalist preacher for a while, and then he just completely, you know, like he read too much of the Bible, and it seems to have kind of gone something similar in your case. And I'm just like thinking about taking this to like the American context and how much knowledge people in general have about Islam, because I've been to a few like events where, you know, there were like discussions about Islam, and there were some, you know, where people could ask questions, and a lot of the questions from Americans were like really like, you know, do you require 4 witnesses for rape? Do you, you know, can you know, is this in the Quran? Is Islam a religion of violence? I mean, nothing was like really precise or incisive, and like with actual knowledge about it. These are very kind of questions that come from like ignorance, basically. Yeah. And do you think maybe that we need to actually educate Americans more about Islam?
I don't know, because quite frankly, Muslims aren't that educated on Islam either. A lot of the time, so like learning Islam growing up, and I think this is how most people interact with Islam, Muslim or not. You have a mediator, somebody feeding you information. Yeah. And within the Muslim community, that's a sheikh, or that's, you know, some guy on YouTube, you know, feeding you this version of Islam you want to hear. So I think a lot of people's knowledge of Islam comes from that you know, person in the middle, that pivot point, feeding them knowledge. Whether that's, you know, you're a white supremacist and it's a bigoted kind of view of Islam, or you're a Muslim and it's, you know, somebody who's trying to paint a pretty picture of the religion. I guess in my situation, I was fortunate enough to, you know, learn from some people who were very committed to studying Islam in an intellectual standpoint. In my Sunday school, we had a class on Tawheed, which is Islamic monotheism, just the oneness of Allah. And we went into the most ridiculous detail of how, you know, saying good luck is considered shirk, or making like paganism comparisons to Allah, because luck is a power that's equal to God. Why would you say that? E equals MC squared was haram, because only Allah can make energy. Really absurd things. And I think, you know, once you bring religion down to that level, once you take it seriously enough to really try to build every atomic block of your worldview on it, it just disintegrates. And people don't go to that extreme when learning religion.
So perhaps you need to educate both Muslims and non-Muslims about Islam. Then, you think it's like, because I feel that without it, when questions come from places of ignorance, it's easy to shoot them down with basic scriptural knowledge, isn't it? And
this is also interestingly an argument that Muslims use against ex-Muslims and seculars, is that if you've studied Islam enough and if you learned Islam enough, you would actually come to believe in it. And that's... 1,000
10 times.
That's like my mother's constant argument every single call, which happens every single day. Where she's like, well, if you read Quran, you won't think that, and you will change your mind. And it's like, well, if you read something other than Quran, of all the other millions of books, and this is very difficult, and Muslims get really stuck, or ex-Muslims in the Middle East, and seculars in the Middle East, and atheists in the Middle East get really, really stuck, because the arguments, like Karim is mentioning, all come from a place where you have to be, and it's probably just the heritage of how, I don't know, like ilm or knowledge came to be. Like almost all of the Muslim scholars or the scientists of the Islamic civilization were somehow sheikhs or knew about Islam or were able to argue fiqh and able to argue about religion, that they expect you to be able to have memorized the Quran and be able to do the tafsir and explain every single aspect of it before you say, and then I came to the sound conclusion. So one of the main problems is that a lot of Muslims believe that their religion is so complex that you can't master it in a lifetime. You will not understand the Fatiha, which is the first chapter of the Quran. It's the tiniest, one of the tiniest chapters in an entire lifetime. But you have to obey blindly. And this is amazing for me. It's like, if I can't even understand, how am I going to obey? So you can't really argue against it. So the other thing is that Islam, or whatever is taking place in the Islamic societies in the Middle East specifically, in the name of Islam, takes over every single aspect of your life. So there isn't a moment where you feel free to, I don't know, to be comfortable with your own thoughts, to be comfortable with your own ideas, to even formulate how do you speak and how do you argue and how do you even think something differently. So there's a lot that needs to happen before Muslims are comfortable even talking about their religion without thinking that they don't even understand it to begin with. Yeah,
I mean, being Muslim, like, you can take the ritual to the point where every 5 minutes you're doing something Islamically related. From what foot you use to enter the bathroom to what you say.
Before you poop.
Yep, or sex. Or sex. Prayers before everything you do. You say dua, before you take a test.
So there's like some kind of analog to zabiha before sex or something like that? You to say something?
You have to do a prayer, like a sunnah prayer, if you want to have a child from this union. And then you have to say this like dua, which is a little tiny, like you're just reciting a little prayer. It's a lot.
Yeah, it doesn't leave much room for doubt.
Now going back to what you're saying about like freedom and being able to speak openly. So I want to discuss apostasy laws as well. I don't know how much you've actually like faced of been in danger of being hit by apostasy laws, but it's like there's a lot of apologist effort devoted to this. I mean, it's like people who completely deny that there's any kind of penalty for apostasy, or if it's only like in a perfect Islamic state, or if it's, I mean, all these conditions and everything. So I'm just wondering, like, is there like any kind of consensus on this? Because as far as I know, all the madhabs, kind of agree on this point that is a penalty.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, formal theology, for the most part, every mainstream school agrees that the punishment for apostasy is death. I guess the amount of wiggle room might depend from school.
Yeah, it's not enforced. Like I live in
a lot of prison.
Death. Like I think in some countries it's just they don't. Or sometimes they just don't enforce it. They don't like actively pursue it. But if you speak out too much, then they don't. Yeah, exactly. They don't actually come after you per se. But
for instance, in Egypt,
that's enough to silence you.
There is no law that says if you say anything against, or if you are an atheist and you speak about your atheism, then it's against the law and you would be prosecuted. But the argument that is used that if you disrespect Islam, then you will be, you will go to jail. Exactly. And the idea, just in the Middle East, for instance, saying that I don't believe in God is already disrespectful to Islam, because how could you not believe in something in God? So, even though that Egypt will say, Egyptian politicians and people will be like, oh no, in Egypt there is really no rule or there's no law against it. There's another way that people are getting prosecuted against it.
Yeah, see, people seem to confuse like sometimes lack of enforcement or reduced sentences with actual, that
Or
everything is okay.
yeah.
Everything is okay theologically, but it's more about
Yeah.
pragmatism in these cases, isn't it?
Yeah, or just simply like, yes, in Egypt the constitution says everybody is free to believe whatever they want to believe, but if you disrespect anything, and sometimes disrespecting could just be by not being of that religion, as we can see between the different religious factions.
And, people enforce these laws on their own a lot. They don't really, wait for a government institution.
Like Nahad Hatar.
Yeah. And there's different levels of granularity on, how, apostasy beliefs are enforced. Even within American ex-Muslims, there's people growing up in families where the father is, I'm going to kill you. In the United States.
That's what happens in moderate countries. I mean, like Bangladesh, they were, for the last couple of years, they were cutting down secularist and atheist bloggers at the rate of like one every couple of months.
Yeah.
Pretty much unstopped until I think recently they cracked down a bit. But even in the so-called moderate countries or countries which don't officially have Sharia law.
And it goes back to Faisal's point that it's an ideological war. It's a war of ideas where, we need to be out there and persuading people that these ideas are bad. We shouldn't be killing people, which is absurd, but it doesn't feel absurd when you're in the context. It's an actual fight that you have. Even growing up, I never really had to... I've had people say some choice things to me, but I've never really had to deal with legitimate death threats. But, you're at a dinner discussion and someone says, yeah, atheists should be killed, just casually, and people laugh. And, we need to challenge it at every level, whether it's people kind of joking about it, or people actively trying to kill apostates.
I mean, the other element of that is just the value of human life, which is every element of society in the Middle East it does not lend a lot of value to human life. And that could be women specifically. That could be, there's just multiple compounded issues. If you're a woman in the Middle East who is secular, speaks for secularism, or speaks for atheism, then there is more of that honor in addition to just like the theological rules and so on. So just like the fact that just speaking casually about, oh no, it's okay if you dishonor your family, it's okay to be killed or something. That.
Sorry, I've never hosted a panel before.
It's all right.
I wanted to put the bottles of water earlier so that they wouldn't like distract from.
No problem. So just like speaking to it, and that's the hardest for me whenever I go home and whenever I'm talking to people, even when I go back to the university, and I'm like talking to philosophy students or part of where I grew up with Palestine, and death is such a everyday reality that it's not a big deal. And if somebody says, "Oh, you've seen him under this guy, so then her family should kill her," I never thought about it, and now that I don't know, present of time.
Has anyone said over the dinner table like something like gays should also be killed?
Yes.
Oh yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
Okay, so they're into.
Anti-Semitism.
It always surprises me, like whenever someone wants to prove like
Not only that, like you witnessed it. Like I witnessed it as a child.
Yeah.
You witnessed people saying this.
No, actually, kind of stoning gays. I grew up in a specific neighborhood in Tunis that at one point had was liberal enough to have a few European gay couple live in it, and they were stoned. And you witnessed that as a child, and you're like,
Did this make the news at all?
of course not. It was in the 80s.
Okay.
No,
Well then.
I saw it on Twitter though.
Sorry, was that Tunisia?
Yeah, I mean, in even Tunis, which is extremely secular, but it's not a secular society in Tunis in terms of mentality. Tunisians are quite religious, and they did vote for Nahda, which is the Muslim Brotherhood in Tunis. So they still believe, and they're very spiritual in terms of their overall belief. And yeah, they're like complete, I don't know what to call them, like red tape, or these things that no Muslim will attempt to talk about, regardless of how secular you are, which is is sexual identity, or the right of women to a certain extent. There's like such a low ceiling on all these things.
By the way, we'll have Q&A, plenty of time for Q&A afterwards, so please note down your questions. And yeah, I also wanted to, like, about this whole thing with the LGBTQ thing and Islam is, like, I noticed, like, whenever that, like, Dean Abdallah or someone wants to, like, make a point that Islam is tolerant of gays, they bring up that, they trot out this one gay imam who's like,
Yeah.
You know the one.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, we all know the one.
Because it's only the one.
Yeah, it's the one, yeah. And first of all, like, he's wrong. I mean, even in the Quran, it's like said that gays are like transgressors beyond all bounds, if you corroborate that. And it's like, I'm just wondering, like, we have this thing where lack of enforcement again, or like people in a secular country not following the theological diktats to the letter is somehow viewed as a theological okay for it, isn't it?
Yeah, I think in the larger kind of American political discourse, sometimes what Muslims believe or how Muslims behave is mistaken as what theology says. And
that works both ways.
It
as well.
goes
I mean,
both
like,
ways.
People
yeah.
like slitting throats and like for say honor killings, for example.
Yeah.
That's not in Islam. Per se.
Yeah, there's
But that kind of works both ways.
It does.
But they only take it
Biggest
like one way.
example,
Yeah.
right? So in Egypt is like 90-something%, and the claim in Egypt is that it's an Islamic thing, but that does not apply to the rest of the Muslim countries.
Yeah.
So in the U.S. it becomes, I don't know, mistaken for this is a Muslim thing.
Yeah, and but it seems to have provided a good vector for it to spread, like, because it happens in Indonesia, it happens in the Bori community in India, it happens in, it doesn't just happen in Central Africa.
I mean,
Exactly.
there are hadiths legitimatizing it. They're not really they're not cited very often. But, they do exist, and they do provide an air of legitimacy to the practice, which is, in my opinion, the biggest problem with Islam. You can excuse a lot of bad things with a quote from the Hadith or Quran.
And male circumcision is only mentioned in the Hadith as well.
Yeah,
Yes.
but that's like almost 100%
That's
of
okay.
Muslims.
Yeah, so actually I was going to talk about, like, the apologetics of disbelief, and, like, people saying that because of some countries don't actually enforce this, that it's kind of okay, and then others say, for example, like, behind closed doors, there's a lot of, yes, this is exactly what should happen. In fact, even over here, like, for example, I've heard, like, people talk about basically crap all over secularism and so on. So is there some kind of, like, private public, like, division between these attitudes?
At some level, yeah. I mean, there's always stuff you're not going to say in public as anybody. And a lot of the times, at least within the Muslim community, discussions are a lot more frank than they would be in front of someone who's not Muslim. So, there is this side of a wishy-washy apologetic trying to paint Islam as this enlightened religion in front of people who are ignorant of Islam, or who a Muslim thinks is ignorant of Islam, usually by their race. It's an assumption. But behind closed doors, often those ideas, homosexuality, it's a sin. Hate the sin, not the sinner kind of attitude.
Which Christians say as well.
Christians say as well. Behind closed doors becomes like LGBT people are equal. There's a translation. And I think this happens in many conservative religious communities. I don't think it happens just amongst Muslims.
Yeah.
There's just there's a culture in public life that where certain conservative ideas aren't really tolerated, and people kind of try to dull them. But at least in my experience as growing up Muslim, once the doors are closed, those beliefs become more frank and more direct.
Once you have, like, open discussion and everything, yeah. What do you think of when Reza Aslan, for example? We all know Reza Aslan, right?
Yes.
What do you think of, like, when he says people don't derive their values from religion, people insert their values into religion, only to counter himself, like, later. But anyway, this is his, like, common catchphrase, basically.
This is actually, he really made this his catchphrase, and he became very famous for it. But this is a conversation that I've had my entire life with my family and my in my society, and even like within academic settings in the Middle East, this is a conversation that happens. So, and that's one thing to kind of like separate what you allow yourself to do versus what society around you is doing. So the conversation that, yeah, this is not Islam. This is more of culture, especially honor killing.
Those are definitely culture. Yeah.
So like that's one thing that is, for instance, because my mother is Syrian, so her claim is, oh, we Syrians, we don't do honor killing. This is a Palestinian problem. And so it's, yeah. So this is. For me, this is a conversation that has been happening for a very long time, and it's really interesting because there's a lot of things, a lot of associations between what you do, what you believe, what you're willing to say out loud. So.
And the apologists want to kind of put everything down to culture, everything inconvenient down to culture, the anti-apostasy, the anti-LGBT, the sexual conservatism.
And then there's the anthropologists who refuse to talk about the culture in any critical way. So you're like, if I spent 10 years in academic settings in graduate school, and it's like, who do you talk to? My husband was an anthropologist, so I was never allowed to talk about my culture with that. And if I was talking to political scientists, I wasn't allowed to talk about my religion. The only thing I was allowed to talk about is my political identity as a Palestinian, which is a national identity. It shouldn't be a political identity. So yes, it's very problematic, and it's from multiple fronts.
Yeah. And speaking of fronts as well, as someone who kind of opposes religion in general and tries to work for secularism and atheism in general, I'm finding that it's almost like there's kind of a convergence and an opening of another front, because in August I locked horns with a Christian apologist about the cosmological argument, and in September on campus, on the same campus, I locked horns with a Muslim apologist on the cosmological argument. So I'm just I think it's kind of I think it's kind of spilling over into some kind of general theistic, apologetic front, almost united, and sometimes they even speak about it, like the Muslim apologists and Christian apologists talk about the others in good terms, look at the Orthodox Jews and the conservative Christians, and the Christians say look at the conservative Muslims, we should be like them, and they're starting to use the same arguments, and that's kind of worrying, because it's it's another front over here that we have to argue against.
It's a front set up for self-destruction. Really.
The People's Front of Judea.
Yeah.
Right.
They can make... usually the the arguments are allied across the existence of God. And then beyond that, maybe some arguments regarding, prophethood of Jesus or whatnot, or Abraham. But once you start, going down the religious divisions, it implodes. So I think William Lane Craig's a good example of borrowing, concepts from Islamic theology, like the Kalam cosmological argument.
Yeah.
But he doesn't borrow anything else from Islam. So I'm not too concerned about it. I don't think it's too big of a deal, because they're uniting around the fact that we think God exists. Beyond that, it disappears. There is no...
It doesn't bother you when, for example, the Pope and the Catholic Leagues, Donahue from the Catholic League, they both supported, or at least gave some kind of lip service to the murders of the Charlie Hebdo cartoonists. Right? The Pope said, if someone insults my mother, I will punch him, and it was kind of tacit support, at least.
There are things like that. I do agree that are concerning. And, there is a lot of apologism with extremism that, hey, you deserve it. That you said something, and it's kind of legitimizing sort of the implicit blasphemy laws that exist within a Muslim society. And that is a problem. But I don't think that's, an implicit coalition of conservative superheroes ready to take down secularism. I think it's just people trying to protect their own back with sort of nonsense they spit out.
Okay, and also I want to talk about kind of the standards of evidence. for example, in Sharia law, which like a lot of people talk about nowadays, a lot of people talk about it ignorantly as well. Like, you know, some people even call it Shania law and stuff like that. There was actually a tweet like, you know, take your Shania law and go back to the dessert.
Yeah.
Quite a famous one. But yeah, it's like
The dessert.
I find Sharia apologetics kind of disingenuous sometimes when they talk about like a lot of things about context and high standards of evidence. Like they say, you know, like you must have these many witnesses and they must all be upstanding and like for example the penalty for fornication, for example, and et cetera, et cetera. Of course, not completely. Or homosexuality, completely discounting the possibility that someone might not be ashamed of what they do and might just confess and be, you know, willing to die for it, which doesn't make it okay to kill them. So, don't you think that argument though is a bit disingenuous, like about that high standards of evidence are just meant to scare people from doing these things, and they're not really serious about it?
I mean, I feel like that goes to how complex the Sharia is and how nobody can understand it and nobody can prove it. So it's just all kind of like a spaghetti ball where you can never really disentangle anything. But yes, Muslims use this as a protection to say, well, hold on, this actually will never apply because the rules are never going to happen. But what does that mean? That means they accept this at some level, right? That it's okay for somebody who committed adultery to be stoned to death. But it's not going to happen. But I'm comfortable with it. But I'm like at some level that it's fine.
I find it very ignorant because historically these laws were enforced. They weren't, you know, just there, you know, during, you know, the height of, you know, Islamic, the power, you know, basically Arab imperialism. These laws were enforced.
Yeah, the Sahaba themselves, enforced them, and like Omar, I believe, like started this thing about throwing people off.
And it's effectively saying,
you know, and I mean, one of his most famous stories that I grew up with about Omar, this was supposed to highlight how forgiving he is. This woman was caught with all of the witnesses, the entire village witnessed her committing adultery. And so she was going to be stoned to death, but she was breastfeeding. And Omar said, we'll wait for 2 years until she stops breastfeeding, and then we will kill her. And then we should be like, wow, this is like so merciful.
Was it?
That's good.
Omar bin Khattab, the story with the stick? Where I forget what somebody's wife did. And he said, I'm going to beat you with 100 sticks. Yeah. And then he makes her go collect 100 sticks. And then he wraps them in a bundle and then taps her with it. And that's supposed to be the mercy.
That's supposed to
the
be
mercy
how
of
good
Islam.
he is with his wife. I love these deliveries because when you're a kid, you're like willing to buy this. Yeah. You're like, wow.
It's all in the delivery,
right?
You can see the dark humor. The laughter didn't spread. It's just us up here laughing.
But yes, this is the problem. I feel like this is how I feel that I'm stuck with my family or any kind of conversation we talk about Islam. Is that they don't see at some level they're allowing. Again, and it goes back to at some level they're okay with death. They're fine with people losing their life for completely nonsense reasons whatsoever. But it's very complex. But
I mean, fundamentally, when you start making these claims about Sharia, you're discrediting the Sahaba and the Prophet himself. So, I mean, personally, I think they're committing blasphemy.
And secularism itself, because I mean, recently, Shadi Hamid, you know of him as well, right? Yeah. So it got to the point, the apologetics about like the supposed compatibility between Islam and secularism and secular governance got to such a point where Shadi Hamid had to, a believing Muslim who is not a reformer per se, he had to get up and say like, whoa guys, Islam is exceptional. It isn't.
There is an issue.
There is an issue.
Yeah. I mean, the other thing is that Muslims believe that their religion is so fragile, and they are so fragile that they have to be protected. And that's not even with Muslims living overseas, where I can understand that there's a need to protect some part of your identity. But that's with Muslims living in the Middle East. Like, in Egypt, and the amount of demonstrations that come out because a political figure or a popular actor or an actress said something about religion or prophet or something, or wore makeup in Ramadan, and it's like, we need to respect our religion. It's like so fragile that it's going to be disrespected by just coughing next to it.
Miriam Faris, she just put a face, a Saudi flag in front of her face, and that was it. Like, boom.
Exactly.
And so I just want to finish on one last point. So this is something actually that I and Faisal brought up last time during the Q&A, but I wanted to ask your opinion on this. So it seems like, for me, I see it as moderation versus extremism is like one school of selective reading versus another school of selective reading, right? And I think like the word moderate doesn't seem to be of much use anymore, because you could technically fall a few fatwas short of al-Baghdadi and be moderate, right? I mean, Al-Qaeda is by that definition moderate. So should we be looking at using like liberal as a term of endearment and as an ideal rather than moderation?
Yeah, I think liberal is a good substitute, because, I mean, there are Muslims out there who do believe in LGBT rights. Mm-hmm. You know, I've met Muslims in college who are feminists, sex positive, but call themselves Muslim. Yeah. And, you know, as someone who left the religion, I think it's kind of hypocritical, but I think we should, you know, they're under the same attack as me when it comes to religion. They're considered an apostate by those who we call moderate. So I think, you know, giving them a label, giving them something to rally around is good, and it is something we should be doing. We should be promoting good, you know, big L liberal values, and liberty in general.
Yeah, in liberty. The concept of liberty, non-harm rather than think about what is harm rather than what is haram.
Yeah, and we should we should remind ourselves that there are people in the Muslim community who are a minority, like us, who do who believe in liberty, who believe in, you know, a lot of the same values we do, but come short at saying God does exist. So, yeah, I would agree with that statement at that point.
I don't think I have a preference whatsoever. I think the first thing that really strikes me is that if you walk in the streets of the Middle East, they're not thinking about that. This is not top of mind for them. There's not a conversation that is happening. It's kind of like...
it's happening in the West, isn't it?
It's happening. It's only happening in the West, really. I mean,
the country could be called moderate, but it has like anti-apostasy laws, and it's still...
Or not only that, or like trying to self-identify what kind of Muslim are you. All you know is like, are you religious or not, and what does that mean to you? Like, and what do you do in front of everybody around you so you're not really pushing too much against the expectations of your society? But it's not a conversation. It's not top of mind. It's not an identity about how they identify within the moderate, liberal, religious spectrum.
What about just secular? Like respecting state secularism and...
See, actually, secularism as a concept is talked about a lot. It's part of the public discourse. It's a conversation that is happening, and there's a lot of positive things around it. Habib Bourguiba's example in Tunis, despite the fact that the religious right really attacks it, is still perceived as a very positive thing, because Tunis always comes out as an example of things are happening very okay, even though there are still some rough patches. So, from my experience, secularism is a word that people are very comfortable with. And I feel they're comfortable with it because to them it really separates their religious identity. It doesn't matter in a secular society how much you believe and what you're doing. It just matters about your expectations from, you know, from the state, exactly. So, I mean, for a conversation in the Middle East with the Middle Easterners about Islam within Muslims, I feel like secularism is more of a phrase that they will be more comfortable with.
Okay. And on that note, a big hand for Karim and Muna. So, we will now have our Q&A. Faisal?
How much time do we have to do?
About 20 minutes.
Is there more water?
No, that's not. Okay. Recorded good?
Yeah.
Recorded good? Okay. Okay, so we'll just have a raising of hands and asking of questions, perhaps? Anyone?
Hey, so one inescapable part of this, which I think people have touched upon indirectly in various points, is what seems like an inescapable tension between intellectual honesty and utilitarianism in terms of, this Majd Nawaz Quillian reform project and exporting what people believe to be, truth, which is, as I think we're probably biased in here towards, atheism. So how tactful do you think you have to be? Do you have to approach this incrementally, and we're just trying to, shift public opinion a few degrees over time, and through the reform project, or should you just go for, the end goal immediately, atheism?
I say
Yeah,
go for it.
who's first? You go? You
Okay.
wanna go?
Yeah, I'm of the opinion, go straight to atheism. I think when I first left Islam, I was more of, let's change society, a couple degrees to the left, more liberal. But I guess the more I kind of am in the secular space, there's a sense of urgency that, people are being hurt. Women, Muslim women mostly are harmed by these ideas. Apostates are under attack because of these ideas, and we shouldn't show them mercy, in my opinion. There's serious, tangible harm that these ideas commit, and I think we should go for the death blow.
Yeah, go.
I don't think that it worked in the past in the Middle East. I mean, just the fact that, again, look at Tunis, where they had a very secular society, and their first vote was for a Muslim Brotherhood faction. They really voted for that, and now all of the signs for, I don't want to say extremist, but fundamentalist Islam is being perceived. I mean, when I grew up in Tunis, because of the laws, there was no hijab. Hijab was outlawed. You were not allowed to wear hijab out in public. You were not allowed to leave work and pray. There were no calls for prayer that were loud. So it was very secular, and it didn't succeed. So I would say that there's going to be a backlash. But I think the conversation should not be which system you go through, but what's the catalyst for that would be. And to me, the human rights, basic human rights, and the conversation of equality for all, and just equality even among the minorities that live in the Middle East and with Muslim communities, and what they go through. I think that's where I see the solution being more successful, because these are the arguments we use. I mean, this is what Palestinian society uses every single day, just to say we exist and we don't want to live in occupation. But when it comes to inter-Palestinian conflict, all of a sudden these political or these ideas of human rights disappear. All of a sudden somebody who believes or votes for Hamas no longer becomes an equal Palestinian as somebody who voted for Fatah.
Yeah, I mean that's actually a very good question. I mean, I'm very biased because I was chilling out with Majd Nawaz for a week, so I'm not going to. And he's a much better dancer than I am, so I am not going to argue. I mean, I agree with the. I mean, this is something that I'm very focused on. I've actually done research on it a lot about what actually works, right? I mean, I'm on a pragmatic level. I care about that, and I mean the results seem to vary. I mean, for me, I would say I take the values, let's say LGBT rights, women's rights, etc., and I try to figure out a sample and see from that sample how many of them identify as atheists and how many of them identify as Reform Muslims. I mean that's the way that I designed the model, and in some places I found the ratio is between 40 to 1. I mean, I'm going to publish the research later. So 40 atheists and 1 Reform Muslim, and I think that the reason for that is that the message of reform is not sexy enough. And also, it's not only about sexy, but it's also about how plausible that interpretation is. I mean, but what I've figured out that if we focus on language like a human right, and we focus on that as a goal, and then we try to push that as the goal, and then religion somehow adapts that as a goal. So just for example, the gay equality case in the United States and Europe, even though it's Christianity, but I think that so the thing about Jesus loves you and therefore he loves gays. Okay, this is, I mean, from an objective standpoint, this is obviously intellectually dishonest. I mean, if you read the scripture one by one, you'll see Jesus was not really much of a hippie, but he was more of a Al Qaeda-like person. But but that being said, that Christianity, as a result of the push of the idea of like homosexual love is love, blah blah blah. Like, so they made the message all about love and stuff. So to some extent, as you look at churches right now, like you go to New York and in Boston and DC, you see like many churches that are like LGBT friendly, and for me this is good enough. Like I think that, I mean, I'm an atheist. I'm not in denial of it, but at the same time, I don't think, not that I'm trying to be intellectually superior, but there are some people who may not be comfortable with atheism. You know, they may not be, the identity, they don't feel good with it. They feel more identified with a religious tradition. They want to keep the cultural traditions and so on. Keep some of the religion. They probably believe in God and want to, like, some extent, just add the spiritual stuff to it. So if they're comfortable with that, okay, but at the same time, the conclusion of their beliefs is that they're accepting of religious pluralism, like anti-apostasy, pro-LGBT. I'm not going to be against that. So I think, so when it comes to what is plausible, what's not, I mean, I think it's person to person. I mean, there's a famous case of this guy called Ahmed Harqan. I don't know if you're with him. Yeah, he's amazing, right?
Yeah.
But one of the things, that Ahmed Harqan was a Salafist who was like hardcore, right? And so I was having a conversation with him about like what really changed you. And he was like, what changed him because he was so attached to the religion. Richard Dawkins actually his later influence. And the reason why he liked Richard Dawkins is because it kind of was a punch in the face, right? Like, God does not exist, your life is completely meaningless, it's full of shit. So he wanted someone to like tell him like you're completely full of shit and your life is meaningless and like God does not exist. And cause somebody who was a Salafist who was very attached to this concept, this came in and like kind of resonated with him because he was so attached to the idea. But maybe if somebody is living in the West, who's a Muslim or Christian and so on, much used to this concept of being respectful, and somebody looks at him with respect and not call him delusional, as Dawkins does. Maybe the message of like, yeah, like I respect your religion, it's cool. Muhammad was a civil rights activist. This kind of mental gymnastics, right? Can actually work with them. So I don't think there is a final solution, for the lack of a better word. I don't think there is like the absolute solution. Sorry not to use that's a Hitler term. I don't think there is like an absolute like answer to how to change everyone's mind. But I think that atheism seems to me, based on the research I've done, seems to be the most easiest, even though it might sound contradictory and counterintuitive, is because people in the Middle East and Muslim world grow up with such strong identity, and it's hard to play this like, if you get this verse and take this verse, and Muhammad said love people here, and he said love people here, add them together, therefore gay marriage is allowed. Like this like mental gymnastics of 1 hour to explain, it's really hard. But if you say just like, you know what, the Quran is not the absolute word of God, or Quran is not really real,
or
and then
you think whatever you want. It doesn't have to be.
Yeah, and then I think
if you want it to be the word of God, good luck. If you don't want it to be the word of God, good luck.
Yeah, so I think it's a plausibility. Yeah.
Yes.
So, do you find that in your paths you've been able to find people who do believe in God, or organizations that do believe in God, who have been helpful to you, or do you think that there's a lot more that these religious organizations could be doing, and if so, how should they be changing?
What kind of religion? Like
Well,
any
for
religion?
example, like Muslims or even Christian churches.
I mean, I guess in my personal life, people who do believe in God, like, do help me. I mean, and, you know, there is a sense of community you feel when you go to the mosque. Like, I still go to the mosque semi-frequently, ironically. And I do enjoy it. I mean, it's something I grew up with. It does get frustrating listening to, you know, khutbahs or sermons and stuff. But I guess, like, the role the mosque plays in my life is really just being, you know, in my culture, the culture I was raised in. and I mean, it's a compromise I chose to make. I know there's a lot of, I have ex-Muslim friends who just don't want to deal with the mosque at all. But I guess, from a cultural angle, the mosque has, helped me stay in touch. But because of that, you make compromises. Like, I can't be fully out. I'm just kind of half out with my parents. So, I mean, yeah, that's pretty much my answer to that question.
Not in my experience, not that I'm saying that in a bad way. I think that the moment I realized that this is not the life for me, I avoided any kind. Because if I do have a lot of friends who belong to very liberal, let's say churches or synagogues, but I understand what it will mean to my family if I get a lot of support from them, which will discredit me. So I kind of really wanted to divorce religion fully and completely. So I did not have that experience.
The question, does religious people help you as? Yeah, I mean, I would say yes. I mean, it depends on which religious people you're talking about. But I mean, based upon my work, in which I have to make partnerships with organizations that do work that try to help other activists and help human rights activists and so on. Yeah, I mean, some of them are religious organizations or people who identify with a certain religion. I mean, the organization, on a personal level, the organization that helped me resettle in the United States is called YMCA, which is a Christian organization. I mean, they don't do personalization, they don't try to convert people, but they take care of refugees, many refugees like myself come in when they come to the United States, they help them with obviously I didn't need to learn English, but they give them free courses of English, they tell them how to find a job. All these organizations are mainly religious. Well, at least religious identity. They're not really the in-your-face type of religious. But and also, I mean, for ages, religious institutions that were built up most of civilization, right? The church is a place in which, for most of the time of the West, it used to be intertwined with the government, and it's really hard to separate charity from religion. And so, yeah, I think with religious people, I've had obviously positive and negative experiences. I've received help from religious people and get death threats from religious people. So it's not one word for all answer. But I think that some people accept the fact that I'm non-believer and they don't have a problem with that. But the moment that they have a problem with that, they immediately start dissociating and not help anyone.
Next question, yes.
Do you think that all three of you, I think, are Arab?
Oh, was it?
Was it?
You can go.
Oh, sorry about that. I gathered all three of you are Arabic speakers. Within the Arabic Muslim world, do you think that, and I guess in relation of it to the West, do you think that Arabic as a language is kind of used as a way of having different sets of dialogue in the Arab communities in the West versus the Muslim communities in the Arab world? Just as an example, if you kind of see things on Al Jazeera news in the West versus, Faisal posted some things like this on Facebook and some of his pages, versus in the Muslim world, very different things that you read and see. I guess, is there a very different discourse that people who aren't Arabic speakers are privy to in the Muslim world, in the West and in the Muslim world where it is, versus those who don't speak Arabic, and you kind of use it as a lingua franca?
I think the problem extends beyond that to even within Arabic-speaking countries, because Arabic is extremely complex language, and Arabic speakers or native Arabic speakers are perceived sometimes as bilingual because you speak your native dialect, and then there's the Fusha, which is an extremely complex kind of Latin for Latin-derived languages. So that's also used to marginalize people, right? So if you're a Tunisian, and if you're a regular Tunisian who did not receive the best education, you are not going to be able to comfortably open Al Jazeera Arabic and read it comfortably. You're going to be depending on the word of mouth type of information sources, text messages and SMS. So Arabic is, so yes, the 250 million people who supposedly speak Arabic as their native language don't speak the same Arabic, and it's used through the socioeconomic system to really marginalize the masses hugely. Not only that, people discredit you as probably, I don't want to throw you under the bus, but as probably Karim has experienced, they discredit you by your accent. Take that from there.
I have broken American boy Arabic.
I mean, not your accent, as in like you don't speak. You're speaking with an English accent or an American accent. But if you're a Moroccan, if you're a Moroccan secular thinker and you're on Egyptian television, people are not going to listen to you because they're going to perceive from your accent that they're not close to you, that there is that division and there's that kind of different culture. And I faced this a lot because I grew up speaking Tunisian and my parents spoke Levantine Arabic, and then we moved to Palestine and I wasn't understood, and language is used largely to really marginalize people who do not speak that.
Even within Morocco, I guess to that point, my family in Morocco is an Arab, they're Amazigh, which is like the indigenous North African people. And, my grandparents learned Arabic late in life. They spoke Tamazight growing up. And their accent impacted them within Morocco, within getting jobs. Like my grandfather was in the military, and it impacted his military career. So that goes deep. To the point of like Al Jazeera being disingenuous, I feel like religious television, because that was on a lot in my house. My mother watched Iqra, which is
That's ouch.
I think like the Christian equivalent is like CBN or something.
Salafist, more like
it's hardcore. Like there's a guy with different sticks. He's like, this is too big to beat your wife with. This is the right size. Like it's pretty intense. But just the dialogue from that sort of media and sort of the Western Muslim discourse, complete opposite. If that got translated into English, we would all peg them as, Al-Qaeda, as extremists. We think they're the Taliban, but they're kind of mainstream in their role.
The other problem with the language is that even when you read translations in Arabic, you're like, what the hell? How did they translate this? So I remember when I went to Birzeit, I met with the head of the philosophy department, and we were talking about some thinkers, and I asked him about Foucault's translation, and he gave it to me. And the first page was like, it was kind of like, just be aware that he was gay. And then all of the stuff that Foucault said, and I'm like, why was this necessary for a college-level intro class into Foucault? Like, why did you need this? And it's just like, let's make sure that we discredit this thinker right away by the one thing that we know culturally we all do not agree to. So it just,
Faisal, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I mean, I just want to expand on the Al Jazeera post that I've made. That I get banned. Well, I get banned for criticizing the Muslim Brotherhood, which, and I was on Facebook 2 days ago to actually complain about that because I made a lot of fuss about it. I mean, Al Jazeera, differences of languages. I mean, Al Jazeera, I call it like the Fox News of the Arab world. And not only that, you should see the sectarianism just one-on-one. In Iraq, when Shias are killed, they say 30 people killed. When it's Sunni area, they say murders. So that's like enough of like sectarian language that you can see immediately over there. And Al Jazeera English, they care about climate change and Black Lives Matter, and from a country.
It's AJ+.
AJ+, which is Al Jazeera. It's just like Jabhat al-Nusra. It's just like Jabhat al-Nusra is Al-Qaeda, but call themselves Jabhat al-Nusra, and now they're moderate, right? So when it comes to, English, Qatar is a state that actually have some form of slavery, which is a kafala system in which black people and Indians and Southeast Asians treated like second-class citizens. And the same goes for many countries in the Gulf. And you see the same kind of media network that is owned by Thani, who's cares about Black Lives Matter in Ferguson, Missouri. Are you shitting me? And I think that but if you notice that there is kind of a trend within both Al Jazeera Arabic and Al Jazeera English. Al Jazeera English never say anything good about America. If you just look at the trend, And I think that the main reason for it, and that's not a conspiracy, that's a conspiracy actually, but but I
Some
think that
people
they,
say.
and I think that I think Al Jazeera America is cancelled, but Al Jazeera English, they try to make Americans so hating more of their country to the way that it would stop them from intervening in Muslim affairs. So now, whenever you're going to argue about Islam, they will tell, well, you have a problem in America too. Why don't you care about that? Why are you worried about the Muslim Brotherhood taking over Egypt? So I think that there is this mentality that make Americans, that's why you see one of the two popular candidates in AJ Plus is Ron Paul and Bernie Sanders, which is kind of like too much on the spectrum, right? Like far right, well, not far right, libertarian, but like social democrat. And the third thing they have in common is that they're anti-interventionist, right? So they try to make Americans so much just like America, like, oh, there's racism over here, the world is falling apart, like, so in that way, they would make less Americans, make them less to the interventionist side. So that's actually kind of expanding. I actually going to publish the article on this soon, but that's kind of the theme of it, which is kind of a conspiracy. But
all right, so I'm going to say something everybody already knows, so I apologize ahead of time. So general consensus of America outside of the MIT building is all Muslims are brown. That's what a lot of America thinks. So contrary to popular belief, there are a lot of white Muslims too. And the question I have for you is, so what is, especially when talking about religion and atheism, what is that dialogue with white Muslims? And to just add a little anecdote, so I'm Turkish myself, and honestly, I was never a Muslim at all. I mean, my grandmother would always read, I've been so disenfranchised and so not attached to the religion. I don't even remember what the early prayers were called as a youngsters. So when I talk to other Turks, and this, like I said, this is just an anecdote, when I talk to other white Muslims, it seems like race doesn't seem to be an issue for them. And
Who are the white Muslims? Are they Turks?
yes.
Oh, okay. So they're not Arabs.
Right.
Oh, okay.
Yes. Non-Arab.
Non-Middle Eastern, non-Arab.
Yes.
Okay.
So
I didn't know if you were talking about converts.
or Bosnians.
Yeah.
okay. So anyways, I'm just wondering, what your dialogue was like with them, because me and other people, we never had any form of discrimination, and even to this day, like I can only imagine if I was brown and if I was a Muslim, I can only imagine what it would be like.
So, a part of my family that my aunt married into, they're Bulgarian Muslim. And a lot of the dialogue with them centers around, they grew up under the USSR. Most people in that family from sort of my parents' age range. And they showed me multiple ID cards, right? They have an ID card with their Christian name, an ID card with their Muslim name. And, they would use their sort of white kind of Christian name most of the time because the USSR was cracking down on Muslims within Bulgaria. And they had multiple identities because living under the USSR as Muslim was difficult. So when I talked to them about, I guess, Muslims in America and the racial dialogue around it, they empathize with it a lot. Mostly people from the older generation who lived under the USSR, mainly because they kind of lived through that, experience of being marginalized because they were Muslim to an extreme, and not like America. But they don't really deal with the discrimination that you could deal with in America because they don't look like the Muslim stereotype. So at some level, they kind of, it's kind of like you should be proud of your faith. You should always express it. You should be out and loud Muslim. But at the same time, it's like, the racist problem, it's not really an issue. So you should be even louder with your faith. It's kind of a weird dichotomy or weird kind of relationship I was introduced to quite recently in the last couple of years. But yeah, they don't really buy into the kind of Muslims are under discrimination to the extent that you should be quiet about your religion. You know, it's always be Muslim and be Muslim loud first, and then everything else second. At least in my experience.
My experience is that probably very similar to Karim, but most of my Turkish acquaintances, for instance, are extremely secular, that they only see the Muslim identity problem as self-generated by Muslim Americans or self-imposed by Muslim Americans. On the other hand, it's I don't know. It's from the Muslim American community here, I feel like their go-to in general, from my experience, which is very limited, mind you, with Muslim Americans, is that their go-to is their national group and their sect group. So in San Francisco, for instance, there are two Palestinian Ramallah-specific organizations, not to include Palestinians from other regions in Palestine. And one is a Christian Palestinian of Ramallah origin, and one is a Muslim Palestinian of a Ramallah origin. And these are the groups that they hang out with, and that's their life with. So they marginalize themselves within their own groups, and that becomes their experience, even in schools and universities. So it's kind of, you fall back to like smaller and smaller groups.
To springboard off of that, like growing up in a rural community where there wasn't really many Muslims, there, like, you don't fall into sort of racial bins. Everybody kind of puts up with each other because, you know, you're basically the diversity of the area in one room for the most part. But, like, in the Boston area, Muslims split by race. They splinter by different regions within countries, even. Like, the one mosque my family goes to is mostly Turkish, and then a lot of Moroccans were going there, and then they had some squabble, and the Moroccans started their own mosque. Like, there's a
Yemeni community here, and my mom, when she came to visit me last year, she went and she felt very uncomfortable because she wasn't Yemeni. Yeah. She didn't understand. Everything was very Yemeni culture. So, yeah.
Yeah, and I think I'm the brownest person in this. But I think that there is. Obviously, I didn't grow up in America. I only came here about like 3 years ago. But and I think that there is an issue with representation being said. I mean, that if you look, there are these two major organizations, Muslim organizations in America. There is CARE and there is ISNA, right? And there's the MSA, which is the student group around campuses. And if you look like whenever there's a terrorist attack, they have the stereotypical Muslims that they put on television. It's a brown. It's a hijabi. They put this like cute Muslim with a hijab and like some pink lipstick. And so they have this stereotypical Muslim that they have put. And this Muslim has to be an apologist, most likely a conservative, most likely going to defend Islam no matter what. The same template, we condemn the attack, but America brought it to itself. Or Charlie Hebdo, what if they didn't draw the cartoon? There's always this so I think that if this is the only thing that people see from what Muslims are, right? Then they're going to stereotype based upon that representation. Obviously, people should not stereotype anyway, so I'm not anyway advocating for stereotyping. But I think that there is the so-called Muslim leaders in the United States have pushed a certain image of how Muslim look like. And there is hardly representation. I mean, look at us, like 3 of us are Arabs, right? How often you see secular Arabs in US television? Hardly none, right? Like you people see Arabs advocating for secularism or being on panels and discussions about terrorism and so on. There's secular Arabs are hardly represented. But if you look at religious Arabs, Linda Sarsour, Amani al-Khataba, or people from CARE and so on, they're always on MSNBC, Fox News, and so on. Secular Arabs are never talked about. And so what happened is that Arab became Muslim or brown became Muslim, and the apologist became the image of what people say in the media. And leave aside Hollywood, in which whenever they bring a brown guy, he's a terrorist. So that's also add something to that. But a combination of these factors that generates. And also, whenever there's a terrorist attack and they check the name and it's like Ahmad Rahim Khan, and then you're like, oh, okay, this is a brown guy. So that is I think a combination of all these factors and representation. I mean, the things that I'm trying to work on, and within with movements and with articles we publish and so on, is that we try to diversify the representation in the media, like in Huffington Post and New York Times and so on, in which we have media partnerships with, in which we present. How often, like, I never heard, like, in America, people say we never heard of secular Egyptians. Like, I'm like, I know at least 100 secular Egyptians, and media in America, huh?
Like, most of Egyptians would identify at a secular spectrum rather than a religious spectrum.
Yeah, and like how often you hear the most famous Egyptian American is who? Dalia Mugahid, who is probably an apologist for the Brotherhood. Okay, like how, so this, who was the advisor of President Obama, actually. And so I think that if we get a change in representation, I think that that's something that all of us should work on. I think some of the stereotypes can be changed.
Okay, we'll take one last question. Would you please keep it brief and please keep the answers brief as well?
Okay.
Is it possible for this question not to be recorded?
Sure.
Okay, thanks. So I'm kind of a fundamentalist Christianity fundamentalist as well, but like to support my fellow secularists. And my question is, if one had a
So actually, we actually had planned like first runner-up and second runner-up prize. The second runner-up prize is going to be Asghar Bukhari's shoe, which he believes Asghar Bukhari is a well-known apologist and he believes the shoe was stolen by anti-Muslim Zionist agents. So we are still waiting from our Zionist taskmasters for this shoe, but in the meantime, first runner-up prize was going to be Rahmatullah Nawrooz's iPhone 7, which he promised. Actually, he initially said, like, atheists can get an iPhone 7. I thought, like, great. But then it turns out, only if you can prove that there is no God, that everything came from nothing, basically, like, impossible 7. So we're going to have to pass on that as well. But we do have the first prize, which is the Atheist Muslim by Ali Rizvi. So Ali is a tireless fighter for secular rights. I think anyone who's involved with like ex-Muslims and secularism knows who Ali Rizvi is. He's basically been working with, he's been speaking, he's been blogging. He blogs at the Huffington Post as well. He's been making videos and stuff. And he's just been an all-around like fighter for secularism and fights Muslims. Also not a bad musician, by the way. His opus here is The Atheist Muslim, a journey from religion to reason. The reasoning being that, you have all these apologists who say you can just cherry pick and, you can just interpret things away. So he's just interpreted and cherry picked his way out of theism altogether while remaining a Muslim and keeping his biryani on Eid. So we have The Atheist Muslim. It's actually pre-ordered, but we have a mock-up over here, 3D mock-up, no less. And I was looking actually for some nice raffle software. Who does not want to be in the raffle? You don't want to receive the prize.
I was planning to buy it, so.
Okay, all right. So, do you guys want to be in the raffle as well?
No.
Okay. So not you? Okay.
You live
You want to be in the raffle as well?
What is the raffle?
The raffle for the book.
Yeah.
Okay. Everyone stay in your places. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20. Please remember your numbers. We'll just do this the MIT way.
Bring your algorithms. Got it. Hello, Walt.
Okay. 1, 2, 3. And you're the winner. MIT style raffle. That's how we do it.
How did you see that?
Huh?
We need to look at the code for this.
Well, it's see, math.floor, times 20.
I don't know if you see
It's
that right.
indisputable.
Monte Carlo method or?
Okay, just take your prize. You want to come up and take it?
Yeah,
Faisal,
sure.
you give the honors? Don't feel that anyway, so it's fine.
Do I need to get on at 1D or?
No, you can both stand, Yeah, just hand over the prize and we'll all clap. Do you want to say your name or?
Oh, I'm Robert McLeod and I'm very pleased to have this three-dimensional representation of the future book.
I think so. It should be about that size, isn't it? Yeah. I mean, maybe not as much, maybe not as thick. I don't know. I have no idea.
It's a bit smaller. But yeah.
I just took the covers and put them on 2 pieces of paper and I cut them.
It should be awesome.
So
You should keep that as a gift.
No, I'm keeping this.
So that's it, and just a little bit about the Secular Society before we leave. So we have weekly secular topic discussions every Tuesday from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. At the Student Center W20 in room 450, that's on the 4th floor of the Student Center. We have tea and hot chocolate, so that's nice, and also some refreshments. Our next out and out event will be for former/nominal/cultural Hindus, and it'll be around the time with Diwali. Diwali unfortunately falls on a Sunday, and then the next day is Halloween, so we're going to have it on November 1st. So it'll be for ex-Hindus, basically ex-dharmic religions generally, like Hinduism, Buddhism, everything. We'll be screening Sita Singh's The Blues, which is an awesome film. It's kind of an irreverent and alternative perspective on the Ramayana, around which Diwali is based, in the north at least. And yeah, thank you. We're the Secular Society of MIT, that's our website. When you go to the website, you'll see a link to sign up for our newsletter at SSOMIT announced, that's the newsletter. Sorry, that's the email list. We have a semi-monthly newsletter, which I edit. It's called the Reason Review. It's basically a curated kind of summary of events, local news and everything related to secularism and atheism and all around godlessness. And our Facebook page is facebook.com/Secular Society of MIT. If you have a valid 21 plus age ID and you are okay with going to a pub, then you can join us starting 10 p.m. For further discussion at the Muddy Charles, which is Building 50, 142 Memorial Drive. And that's the end of the day's proceedings, but I'm just going to play one little thing.
Ex-Muslim because I cannot be a free hoe.
Ex-Muslim
because I want to wear silk underwear.
Ex-Muslim because just eat your pork and haribos and move along quietly now, even if you're sharing.
Ex-Muslim because astaghfirullah, why would you even have a reason to become ex-Muslim?
Ex-Muslim because I'm weak as fuck.
Ex-Muslim because you've already got daddy issues, you didn't seek knowledge about your faith, your life sucks. So you want attention so bad, you commit shirk.
Ex-Muslim because, okay, keep it moving on, so no one cared. You left a religion, yet you are still talking about it love.
Ex-Muslim because Sakebumbu.
Ex-Muslims are like ex-boyfriends posting your ugly pics all over Facebook. Like, fine, I was a bad lay, but why you gotta broadcast it?
Ex-Muslim because now I can wipe my ass with just paper. She's great.
Hashtag ex-Muslim because I'm an ignorant shit who have inherited this religion and did not learn it. Therefore, I'm going to pretend like I know everything.
The fuck is ex-Muslim because half you sound retarded and stupid as fuck.
I am most confident that if you were a chicken, you would lay Islamic eggs as much as you hate Islam.
Ex-Muslim because Jahannam. Hellfire.
Ex-Muslim because I couldn't
Talk about Islam again. I and I'll have your head fucking chopped off. You hear me, bitch? Islam.
Ex-Muslim because I wanted my children to have a cheese and ham sandwich from Tesco.
Ex-Muslim because see you in hell, guys, and you will be begging for water, but I won't give a shit then.
Ex-Muslim because you are either a non-Muslim from the beginning or a Muslim with a weak iman. Thank you.
Ex-Muslim because it's a test from Allah to bring you back into the religion, to fall in love with it, and follow it the right way.
Ex-Muslim because I want to suck dick.
That's true.
I couldn't handle the social embarrassment when asking the Pizza Hut Don to cut the pizza with a clean knife. Wow. Because it's like a pork or something.
Ex-Muslim because I want to celebrate pagan holidays.
It is free for people to leave Islam. Who the fuck said it isn't? Stop manipulating people, you fucking bitch. Wow.
Ex-Muslim because I can have halal sex. Now.
Okay, that's the end of it. We'll get this room until 10, and then we'll move to the Muddy Charms if you want to join us.
Make Islam great again.
Make atheism great. Make both great. Let's make everyone great again.